Hey, work from homers, Adam Schroeder here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schroeder. Today we have Dr. David D. Burns on the show. He is an internationally renowned psychiatrist and adjunct professor emeritus in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Stanford University School of Medicine. He's also the #1 New York Times bestselling author of multiple books, including Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, When Panic Attacks, the new drug-free anxiety therapy that can change your life, Feeling Great, the revolutionary new treatment for depression and anxiety, 10 Days to Self-Esteem, Defeat Depression, Develop Self-Esteem, and Discover the Secrets of Joy in Daily Living, and the book Feeling Good Together, The Secret to Making Troubled Relationships Work. That sounds interesting, and I think it's very relevant to today's post-pandemic time period. Dr. Burns was a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy. Wow, because that is used by everyone these days. And he is a founder and creator of the new TEAM-CBT. I'm assuming the CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which makes ultra-rapid recovery from depression and anxiety possible. Dr. David D. Burns, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to have you on the Work From Home Show.
Well, my pleasure to be on your show. Thanks so much.
Yeah, let's first start with anxiety that our listeners might be feeling, people are feeling post-pandemic. The economy is still very much in a rebound. A lot of people lost their jobs. There's a lot of job instability, high unemployment. You can't trust the numbers that are printed. You just know, you just see it. So many people have lost their jobs. You see the lines at the food banks. And then on top of that, we're also in a politically charged environment. I think things have settled down a little bit post-election, largely because the media, it seems, has settled a lot of things down. But there was a lot of anxiety heading up to the election, post-election, and we saw what happened in early January at the Capitol. What happened there, and I think that was a result of anxiety that so many people had. So what are your tips in these times that we're living in, post-pandemic?
Well,
what are your tips
there's
to handle?
Certainly a lot of pain and suffering going on. This is the most emotionally charged environment I would say I've seen since my childhood, really. A lot of people are hurting in very real ways, and my heart goes out to everyone who's listening, who may have lost your job, your source of income, may be struggling with fear and anger and confusion. One of the things about cognitive therapy that I popularized with my first book, Feeling Good, that's potentially liberating, is that our emotions don't actually result from the circumstances in our life, but rather the thoughts we have about them. And that's potentially liberating because we can't always change the political climate. We can't change the facts that are going on, but we can change our perceptions, the interpretations that we're making. And that is a powerful idea that goes back 2,000 years to the time of Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, who said humans are not disturbed by things or events, but by our thoughts about them. What's new, that's been known for 2,000 years, although it's hard for people to grasp it because it's so basic, so obvious, and so simple. It's kind of hard to get it at first. But the new idea that is revolutionary and is probably unique to the middle of the 20th century with the great teachers like Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck and many others who were the creators of cognitive therapy, is that when you're upset, depressed, anxious, angry, ashamed, hopeless, panicky, the thoughts in your mind that are creating those feelings are not valid. They're distorted. There's 10 thinking errors that trigger depression and anxiety. And then the really exciting and hard to believe idea is when you change the way you think, you can change the way you feel. That's the rough outline. I could give you an example, perhaps.
Yes, please.
I have on my website, feelinggood.com, tons of free resources for people. I know that a lot of people don't have much money, and so I've created classes and all kinds of stuff there on my website, including we've done over 200 Feeling Good podcasts. They come out every Monday, and you can link to any of them from my website, feelinggood.com. And because of the pandemic, I do live therapy on my podcast to prove and to demonstrate how people can recover from sometimes even decades of depression and anxiety in a single 2-hour session. I always work with people in 2-hour sessions, and I can usually complete treatment in one session. And so you can hear a lot of these, and a lot of I also have what I call Corona casts. These are podcasts featuring live work with people who are struggling with something related to the pandemic. And in each case, you'll see that it's not the pandemic that's causing their intense anxiety and depression, but a distorted thought. And I might say that healthy negative feelings aren't the same as unhealthy negative feelings. I'm careful. I've had my 2 vaccinations, but I'm still careful. I wear a mask, and when I'm out jogging, I make sure I don't get close to other joggers. So some healthy concern is fine. But if you're feeling 60, 80, 90, 100% anxious and depressed, that's not what's going on. That's your thought. Well, one fellow I treated said he'd be happy, feeling happy, and all of a sudden lightning would hit him, and he'd have a thought like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be happy because people all over the world are dying. And so I have no right to feel happy. And then he'd suddenly feel extremely depressed. And just to simplify it, he discovered that his thoughts contained a lot of distortions. One of them, self-blame. Another one would be a should statement, like telling himself that somehow he's responsible for everyone who's dying, and therefore it's immoral to feel happy. And once he saw that, he was able to talk back to that thought, and his depression went away. And it sounds kind of simple. We had to try a few things that didn't work until we found the thing that did. But then I challenged him. I said, now I'm going to be your negative self, and I'm going to talk to you the way you talk to yourself. And I said, now listen, you better not feel happy because people all over the world are dying, and so it's wrong of you. You shouldn't feel happy. And then he was able to talk back and say, that's nutty. I'm not the cause of the pandemic, and while it's healthy and loving to feel compassion for people who are suffering, it's ridiculous to tell myself that I have to make myself miserable. That would be an example. And it shows how each person has their own negative thoughts. There aren't formulas you can apply because of a pandemic or because of this or that. But I have patients write down, what are you telling yourself? What are your negative thoughts? And then you can see these distortions in them, like all or nothing thinking, self-blame, emotional reasoning, fortune-telling, mental filtering, discounting the positive, magnification, minimization. So it's a fairly simple model, but it's pretty sophisticated too. And the great thing about it is it allows me to bring joy and recovery to people really, really quickly. And nothing makes me happier than working with someone who's sobbing at the start of a session, and then they're laughing and feeling joy at the end of the session. Because when they recover, when they feel joy, I feel the same thing.
Do you think any of this has to do with the fact, people talking about feeling that guilt? Do you think a lot of it is, or any of it is due to just the access to information we have nowadays? Because it seems to me that before like the 24-hour news cycle, before Twitter, before all of that stuff, I mean, you knew that things were happening out there, but it didn't kind of come into your house as much as it does now. And I mean, nowadays it's even to the point where, 5 people will complain about something on Twitter. There'll be some article will talk about it, then some bigger, publisher will see it and post it on their website too, and then suddenly, everybody thinks we're out to cancel everything, or you should feel bad if you're doing this. Has that created more of the issue that you're seeing?
There have been huge changes in the way people feel since the time of the pandemic, to say nothing of the influence of the horrific political situation, the deeply divided country. I've actually done and published polls on how people were feeling before the pandemic and since the pandemic, men and women in multiple dimensions: hopelessness, anxiety, depression, anger, as well as satisfaction in intimate relationships. And my data shows that for women, everything has doubled since the beginning of the pandemic. There's twice as much depression, twice as much anxiety, twice as much hopelessness, twice as much anger. For men, the emotion that's really changed is anger. Men, like women, are now twice as angry on average as they were before the pandemic, before all the political turmoil. What has not changed, which shocked me, is satisfaction in intimate relationships. People feel as loved and cared about and as close to others, their loved ones, now as prior to the pandemic. But I'm concerned, not so much from a psychiatric perspective, although I am a psychiatrist, but from a political perspective. I think there are times in history when, world wars happen, where tensions escalate, where people begin to turn to violence. And I'm personally disturbed in a healthy way, I think, about the hatred, the profound divisions in our country, the polarizations, and that polarization is also caused by distortions, but positive distortions. See, there's 10 negative distortions, like all or nothing thinking. The depressed patient says, "Oh, I'm not a complete success. I'm a total failure. I'm inferior. I'm worthless." That's all or nothing thinking. But you can also have positive all or nothing thinking, and that's where you think of yourself as 100% and other people as zeros. And we see a lot of that today. Labeling, you can label yourself negatively. I'm a loser. But you can also label others negatively. That's a positive distortion. Your political party, you're all a bunch of losers. You're all a bunch of liars. You're all a bunch of lefties. You're all a bunch of Trumpites. Seeing others as globally bad and yourself as morally superior. And sadly, that's the kind of thinking that leads to violence. Positive distortions lead to violence and war. And the thinking that leads to war and violence and hatred is totally distorted. It's not based on valid, realistic thoughts. But it's hard to change the positive distortions because people feel so good. They want to feel superior to others. They want to look down on others. And there's a part of human nature that is excited by violence, that's attracted to violence. And so I feel profoundly sad and concerned about the state of our country, the state of our world. And we survived World Wars I and II with unbelievable suffering, but now the weapons people have are just overwhelming, and this probably is not what we're supposed to be talking about. But I think there's a good reason to have healthy negative feelings, to have healthy concern, because problems are real. But depression and panic and being overwhelmed with negative emotions is not necessary. I feel I'm concerned about the country, but I feel tremendous joy every day. I feel grateful to be talking to you right now. What a fantastic thing! So you only need to change your distorted thoughts if you're hurting, and a lot of the people right now are hurting who are listening. They're feeling depressed. They're feeling inferior. They're feeling inadequate. They're feeling anxious. They're feeling they're not good enough. And for those people, you can change the way you feel. And one more thing to give a promo, which is in bad taste, but there's a lot of research on people who read my first book, Feeling Good, which is a mass market paperback you can get for, I think under $8 on Amazon. And research shows that 2/3 of the people who read that book recover from even severe and chronic depression just by reading the book and doing the exercises in it. And so if you are hurting, you can change the way you feel. And you don't feel that way when you're depressed. You feel hopeless, and I'm a hopeless case. But that's a very inexpensive thing you can do. And if you want to do something even cheaper, I've got a free depression class on my website. I've got a free anxiety class on my website, 20, 30 sessions. You just go to feelinggood.com and you can take a depression test and see how depressed you are, and then you get free access to the depression class. There's no upsell. There's no commercialism. You can take an anxiety test. You can take a happiness test. You can take a relationship test. You can find out where you're at and get some free help.
As a psychiatrist, do you think pills and prescriptions are ever the solution or the best solution for mental health issues?
Well, for real severe ones, like schizophrenia, for example, or bipolar 1, where you go into psychotic, euphoric states and run naked, through the park and do crazy things and get arrested because of the mania, that and schizophrenia medications play an important role in treatment. But for the vast majority of people struggling with depression or feelings of insecurity or anxiety, phobias, social anxiety, those problems can almost always be treated quickly now and successfully without medications. I started out as a pill doctor. I completed my residency at Penn after going to the Stanford Medical School. Stanford's where I'm back now teaching. But we were taught that there was this chemical imbalance in the brain and that antidepressants were the answer. But after my residency, I did 3 years of research on depression, and I won awards for my research on brain chemistry. And our research showed that depression does not result from a chemical imbalance in the brain. And recent research on the chemicals called antidepressants confirms what I suspected early on, that they're really hardly better than placebos, if at all. And I saw that in the 1970s. That's why I left academic psychiatry and having a career giving out pills. Most of my patients weren't recovering. That's why I went into cognitive therapy, a drug-free treatment for depression and for anxiety disorders. And I've never been against pills. I'm just against pills that don't work. And in the early days, I prescribed antidepressants on 13,000 occasions. I never recommended them, but if patients said, oh, I want Prozac or I want an antidepressant, I would prescribe it for fear of being sued if I didn't. But I haven't prescribed an antidepressant now in 25 or 30 years, and my patients get better really fast. The powerful techniques are the techniques I describe in Feeling Good and Feeling Great, or my books like When Panic Attacks. And so, you know, I'm not against pills, but I'm in favor of recovery, rapid recovery. And sadly, you don't often see that with the antidepressants. If you're taking one, it's helping you. God bless you. That's great. But so many people do not respond to antidepressants. About a third of people depressed people will recover if you give them a placebo and tell them this is a powerful new antidepressant, and they'll recover, 35%, and they'll say, wow, this is a fantastic new pill, but it was just a placebo. And that's what antidepressants do. Again, about a third of people will really do great if they get an antidepressant, but it's a placebo effect. It's not a true chemical effect in most cases. So that's the bad news, but the good news, the great news is powerful new forms of psychotherapy are being developed now that can work really quickly and sometimes even without a shrink, just by reading a book like Feeling Good or the new one, Feeling Great. And if you need the help of a shrink, go for it. There's no rule that says we all have to cure ourselves, but it's great to know that there are fantastic self-help tools now that often can lead to remarkable dramatic reductions in negative feelings.
So when you look at, let's say that I'm not personally depressed, but I'm seeing, a close friend or a loved one kind of start to, I start thinking, they might need some help. You talked about ways that you can personally do it for yourself, but how do you find it's best for significant others or people to kind of get the people close to you help and convince them that they need to go about getting help?
That's a really cool and important question, and I've done a couple of podcasts on that, one of them called How to Help and How Not to Help. And the thing that's a little bit tricky is that when you throw help at a friend or loved one who's depressed, it's not going to work. They're not going to appreciate that. When you try to cheer people up or tell them how wonderful they are or give them some advice, that will more or less never be effective and almost always makes them feel worse. What they really need is your good listening skills, acknowledging how they feel, expressing some warmth, paraphrasing their feelings, finding truth in what they're saying, letting them know that you love them and you know that they're hurting. And that's just pure support without trying to help. But that can be helpful. For example, my daughter never wanted to get married, never was 100% she's never going to have a baby, hated the whole thing, and all of a sudden she shifted, and she'd been living with this guy for years, and she suddenly decided she wanted to get married, and they had a baby, and a beautiful grandson who's now 11 years old. But after he was born, she started thinking and telling me things like, Dad, now I'm in prison for 18 years. I can't go to Aikido anymore. I've got to give up my life. I have to do everything for my child now. And I was very clear not to help her in any way. Instead, I just agreed with what she was saying. That's called the disarming technique. I acknowledged her feelings. I expressed some love and admiration. So I said things like, Senia, what you say is true. And mothers, give up so much for their children, and to me it seems kind of unfair too. You are in a kind of prison, and what a loving mother you are, but I can imagine you feel trapped and angry and resentful and really down and discouraged. I love you so much. Just tell me what that's like for you. So you see, my statement is just asking questions, acknowledging feelings, and inviting her to talk more. And then she would say, "Oh, Dad, actually, I'm pretty happy to have my son, and I'm really feeling great, and I'm really proud of him, and I'm glad I did this." So I refused to help her, and that would cause her to recover from her funk in pretty much 30 seconds, 100% of the time. And I hope I've made that clear, but if you want to learn more about that, listen to my podcast. You can go to my website, and they're all listed there with links to them, and you can listen to how to help and how not to help. And it's not as easy as you think, because therapists, as well as the general public, are kind of addicted to trying to rescue people, trying to save people, trying to give advice. And that is not the way to go. Now, one other thing you can do to help a friend, you might encourage them to buy a copy of Feeling Good, or buy one and hand it to them as a gift. It's written about at the 8th or 9th grade level, so even someone in high school can read that book and benefit from it, as well, of course, as adults. But that's my tip on how to help loved ones who are upset. But it's not easy to follow the advice I just gave, and you are going to have to put some effort into learning how to communicate with people using those tools I mentioned, the 5 secrets of effective communication: the disarming technique, thought and feeling empathy, inquiry, I feel statements, and stroking. And those tools take effort to learn how to use, but they can transform your life and your relationships with other people. And therapists have to learn them as well as the general public, because even therapists don't actually do all that well. Research has shown on empathy. Therapists think they're good listeners, but they often make the same mistakes of rescuing and helping and giving advice, the same mistakes that the general public makes.
Yeah, well, talking a little bit more about mental health, what distortions that you talk about in one of your books, what distortions do we need to think about and get rid of from our thinking so we can be more positive?
Yeah, right. Well, there's 10 of them. All or nothing thinking that we mentioned. A second one is overgeneralization. That's where you generalize from a negative event to yourself and to the future. Like a young woman contacted me recently because she broke up with her boyfriend of 2 years, and he left her, and she had the thought, I must be unlovable. And so you see, and that caused tremendous depression for her, because she believed that thought and didn't realize how distorted it was. You see, she's saying, because this relationship broke up, then I'm unlovable. She's generalizing to herself, and she's generalizing to the future, saying, I'm afraid I'm going to be alone forever. And that you see, that those thoughts aren't true. But you don't know that when you're depressed, because you think your negative thoughts are as valid and real as the skin on your hands. Her thought is also an example of mental filtering, focusing on something negative and discounting the positive. She's a wonderful, beautiful, awesome young professional woman, but it also almost all of a sudden none of that counts, and so she just feels like a total loser. And we use them, and then there's other things like mind reading and fortune telling. Fortune telling, I'll be alone forever. Mind reading, no one could possibly love me. Those are common distortions. Magnification and minimization. Magnification, blowing things out of proportion. Like when you procrastinate, you say, "Oh, I have so much to do, I'll never get caught up." And then emotional reasoning from how you feel. I feel like a loser, so I must really be a loser. I feel hopeless, so I must really be hopeless. And reasoning from your feelings, that's what mental health professionals have advised people for decades. That's the key to mental health. Express your feelings, become aware of your feelings. Well, your feelings are important, but your feelings are caused by your thoughts. And if the thoughts are distorted, your feelings won't be valid. She's telling herself something, that's not true. And then there's like should statements. I shouldn't have screwed up. I should be better than I am. My relationship should always go on forever. I should never break up with anyone. And then self-blame is another big one. It's all my fault. And then sometimes the solutions to these things are relatively quick, although I don't mean to make them overly simplistic, because it takes some skill to change the way you think and feel. But we focused with her on a technique called let's be specific. Why specifically did this relationship break up, rather than you're unlovable? But there may be something that you could learn here. And then what we figured out is that she's a very enthusiastic young woman, which is great. She loves to travel all over the world and have adventures in South America and whatever. But she sometimes gets excited about things and then makes plans and thinks the other person is on board when they're not. And then the person backs out at the last minute because they never were that excited, and then she gets hurt in an argument and ensues. And so that was easy for her to figure out how to stop doing that, how to start asking people. If she said, let's go to Vancouver for spring break, there's a cool rock concert there, and then the other person says, sounds good, then say, now, is that something you'd want to do? Or maybe you're not so hot on that, just to kind of feel the other person out more instead of mind reading, which got her into trouble. And then I asked her to ask people, do people think that you are, too controlling or too this or too that? And so we had a seminar, and she asked the people in the seminar, and she found out that people loved her. And then I gave her a few tips on dating and, how to not chase men and how to get men to chase her. And she was feeling great. And then she called me 6 months later, and she said, Dr. Burns, I have a new problem. I think I need a tune-up. And I said, I'd be happy to. What's your new problem? She says, so many men are chasing me now. I don't know how to say no to them. I feel guilty. So she went from being unlovable, she went from rags to riches. But it involves crushing these distorted thoughts that are at the heart of our misery. The problem is not that you're not good enough. The problem is you're telling yourself you're not good enough. The problem is you're beating up on yourself with cruel, distorted thoughts that you think are true. See, depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. They're always based on a fraudulent message that you're giving yourself. And I don't mean that to criticize anyone, but as a source of liberation, because the moment you discover that your negative thoughts aren't true, in that very instant you can recover. That's why I can often complete a course of therapy in just 1 2-hour session, because I've gotten pretty good at helping people identify the distortions in their thoughts and crush them. And we have a lot of new techniques now also that are even quite different from the ones I've just described. But I'm just excited to have so many amazing tools to help people. When I was a psychiatric resident, all they trained me to do is say, tell me more. And then the patients would cry and vent, and I was advised, you can only say, tell me more twice during the session. Don't say anything else. And the patients would say to me, Dr. Burns, you're not helping me with my depression. You're not helping me with my marriage. And then I'd say, tell me more. And then they'd get pissed off. I'd say, you're doing it right now. Are you going to help me? And I'd say, tell me more. It was horrible. And then my advisor said, when you run out of your two tell me mores, motion with your hands, which means cry, vent. And my supervisor said, oh, you're doing great work. Your patients are angry and they cry all session long. They're getting all the negative feelings out. And I said, great, yeah, but does the time come when they're cured? when does all this anger and weeping and sobbing turn into joy and euphoria? Is that actually going to happen? And they never answered my question, and I never saw that happen. And I wondered, I said, I wonder if it would be a way to measure therapy, like a sports thing, to see how much change you get within the session, and to have tons of techniques to change the way people feel. And I didn't know if it was possible or just a pipe dream, but that's what has now evolved, and I'm thrilled that has come to pass. Now I have the tools. We measure things at the start and end of every session, so I can see for sure how much the patient has recovered. Has the depression gone all the way to zero? How empathic was I? The patient rates me on empathy during the session, and it's a very sensitive scale, and it's easy to get a failing grade. How helpful did the patient rate the session? And they write down, what did they like, what did they dislike. It's like a transformation in psychotherapy from the time when I completed my training at University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. And now therapy is fun. It seems cruel to say that because I'm often working with suicidal, angry, depressed people in incredible despair, but bringing them to joy is the greatest thing in the world. On one of my podcasts, for example, I treated a woman live who was struggling with a Howard Hughes disease. She'd had more than 20 years of this germ phobia that Howard Hughes had, a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, and you're constantly cleaning yourself all day long and trying to stay away from germs. And I treated her I have a free psychotherapy training group at Stanford every Tuesday for community therapists. They can come and get free psychotherapy training for the rest of their lives if they want. And I treated her live to show the students how some of the techniques worked. And she overcame her OCD in about 5 minutes during that session. And I have a little video of it, too, of going out in front of our outpatient psychotherapy building there at Stanford and putting her hands in a grimy trash barrel that was all filled with soot and gooey, horrible stuff. And one of the students had an iPhone and actually filmed that 30-second moment where she just crushed her OCD, and it was terrifying to her, but we both put our hands in that trash barrel and rubbed all this dirt on our faces, and she went from 200% anxiety into a state of euphoria, and she's been cured ever since. You know, recovery can happen fast, but when people hear that or see that video, sometimes they get ticked off because they've been told by their shrinks that this is a lifelong disorder. I had a fellow who put a comment on YouTube after listening to that podcast with Sarah and then the video that showed her actual recovery, and he just said his comment was F you. He was enraged that I was claiming that something like OCD could often be cured in a single session or a brief period of time. And I can understand his anger, because if you had told me even 20 years ago that this kind of ultra high-speed recovery from depression and anxiety is now possible for many people, I too would have thought you were a con artist. But now I see that I was wrong, and it is possible.
So why do you think your methods and this thing hasn't become more popular? If you can show that it can be done, why do you think it hasn't been more widely adopted?
Well, there's two issues. First, it is growing really rapidly. There's feeling good therapy centers based on these techniques are popping up all around the world, and the therapists who have been trained in this is expanding rapidly. So we are enjoying some expansion, but we need to get some controlled outcome studies, because you can't really get on the map until you've proven your therapeutic approach with a good outcome study. I probably should do it myself, but I've always felt that the person who creates a new form of therapy should not be the one to test it, because when people test things they've created, their research is always contaminated, you might say, and so I want some independent people who don't have a vested interest to do some outcome studies, but that would really put us on the map. I am analyzing a database that I got from the Feeling Good Institute here in Santa Clara, California, and they've given me data on over 20,000 therapy sessions from about 50 or 80 therapists trained in TEAM-CBT, a longitudinal study, a naturalistic study with data, and I've analyzed about half of the data. It looks really great, and I want to analyze the other half of the data and see if I can replicate the same result. But I think those patients were getting about 60% reductions in depression in about 4 sessions on average. And that's at least as good or better than current published outcome studies. Another thing that might help is I'm developing a Feeling Great app, which will do all these things for people electronically. And we did an initial testing. It's taken 2 years to create. It's a very labor-intensive project, but I'm trying to create an electronic version of myself. And my hope is to create an app that can outperform human therapists, because that would be amazing, I think, because it could be free or very inexpensive and get help to people all over the world who are struggling. And we did a pilot study just with 20 patients. We're going to do one now. We have 1,000 people on the waiting list to try our next iteration of the app. But the patients had something like a 55% reduction in hopelessness just, I think, in the first 48 minutes of the working with the app, which is better than what you see in controlled outcome studies that go on even for 6 months or 2 years. So I think the app will, you see, even my book was kind of outperformed human therapists, Feeling Good, because when I saw the research, that was done by independent researchers, that 65% of the patients who they handed the book to recovered in 4 weeks with no drugs, with no psychotherapy. I said, my book is outperforming me because I don't see 65% of my patients cured in 4 weeks. That was back at, in 1980 when I was just starting out. But now I think that I've created something. We're almost ready to roll with the new beta test. And if that shows that what I think, that this app, the Feeling Great app, can deliver rapid recovery to people without a therapist, I think the implications could be huge. If any listeners want a beta test, you can go to my website, feelinggood.com/app, and sign up to be a beta tester. But there, you see, once we get that thing launched, it'll be easy for us to get outcome studies with hundreds, if not thousands, of patients, because we can be randomly assigning people who come to test the app to 2 conditions. We can have a waiting list condition or send them to some other website where they get treated by human therapists or counselors, and keep the data on both groups. And I think it'll be that then we'll have something that we can go to CNN or solid media sources with sound research proving that this new approach is effective for many people.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of your books, Feeling Good Together, The Secret to Making Troubled Relationships Work. I think this is an incredibly important book when it comes to the pandemic, relationships, marriage. We saw that divorce filings have increased in the year 2020. It's not
anger's way up.
Anger's way up. Yep, anger's way up. And I personally have several friends and family members who either got separated or filed during the pandemic or the early part of 2021. So let's talk a little bit about that book and why I just don't understand. Why is it so difficult for 2 people to get along, 2 people. We're not talking 8 people. We're talking 2 people.
Yeah. Well, to find out, when I was back at Penn doing, I did some research on relationship satisfaction, and there were a lot of theories going around about why people have happy or unhappy marriages. Like if you have, one partner is kind of demanding and dominant, and the other is kind of submissive and always saying yes, maybe that pattern would lead to a happy relationship or an unhappy relationship. So I developed this survey and gave it to 1,000 people with happy and unhappy relationships that measured a lot of these attitudes that people have about themselves and their partners. And then I worked with a graduate student in kind of mathematical modeling at Penn. He was in the Department of Economics, actually. And we trained the computer to generate and test hypotheses. So the computer could be testing like 1,000 hypotheses a second type of thing. And we had the computer test all of these theories about what's the key to happy or unhappy marriages. And the computer said, all of your theories are wrong. None of them have any validity whatsoever. But there's only one thing that predicts not only how people are going to be feeling now, but what's going to happen to their marriage in the future. And the computer said, and that's blame. If you're blaming your partner for the problems in your relationship, that is not only going to make you and your partner miserable now, that's going to predict a failed relationship soon. And at first I was disappointed with that result because I was hoping for something complicated and I could have all these fancy things to tell people about patterns and things like that. But after a period of time, I saw the computer was right. And it was interesting that a computer had to teach me about love. What's really the key to love, to hatred, to failed or loving relationships. And so that's the thing that I've really focused on in the book, Feeling Good Together, is there are 2 questions. The first question is, if you're unhappy with your spouse or with a friend or anybody, you're ticked off, do you really want to get close to that person? And that's the first question, because a lot of times people don't. They're complaining about somebody, but they're not asking for help. And so the first thing we do is try to find out, when I'm working with someone, do you really want to develop a more loving relationship with your husband or your wife or your sister or your neighbor or whoever you're ticked off at? And then if they can sell me on the idea that they really would like a more loving relationship, then we come to what I call process resistance. Are you willing to do the thing you'll have to do to develop a loving relationship? And what that thing is stop blaming the other person and look at your own role in the problem. And we've developed some powerful tools for doing that. And the tools can work really, really rapidly. All I need is one thing that your spouse said to you, and write it down. What did he or she say? And then what did you say next? And then the analysis of that brief interaction will be the key to all of the problems in your relationship. And it will show your role in the problem. And if you have the courage to do that, to look at your role, and I hate doing this myself, because when I'm mad at someone, I like to blame them. I don't want to look at my own role. And then when I have to look at my own role and suddenly discover what I'm doing that's fueling this problem, it's shameful to me. I hate having to do that. It's painful. It involves what the Buddha called the great death, the death of your ego or self. But if you're willing to do that, it's liberating, because if you have the power to create a terrible relationship, you have the power to create a loving relationship by changing the way you communicate with that person, changing the way you interact with them. So that's what the book Feeling Good Together is all about, and it's probably my best book, but it's my most unpopular book because people don't like this message. They want the message you're a victim, it's your husband's fault, it's your wife's fault, things like that. But it's a book that's really based on the truth about what's really going on, and the tools are fantastic. And the people who want to learn those tools and the 5 secrets of effective communication, it can have a dramatic change on your life. It had a dramatic change on my life. But it takes work, and it takes time. That's usually not the quick recovery that I see with depression and anxiety, because resistance is so great in the area of interpersonal conflict. And humans are attracted to love and peace and joy and creativity, but humans are also attracted to blame, to anger, to feeling morally superior, to judging others, to looking down on others. And that's both an important psychological reality, and it's also the basis of most religions, this dualistic aspect of human behavior, and how hard it is to get people to give up hatred and conflict and blame and feeling superior to others, and take the humble step of looking at your own role and changing yourself. But when you do, when you show that humility, when you suddenly see, and there's some really neat tools to actually put meat on the bones, and I can show you how to pinpoint exactly, figure out exactly what you're doing that's causing problems in your relationship. And if you have the courage to look at that, huge things are possible. But a lot of people don't want to look at that.
Yeah, completely agree. Dr. David Burns, multiple New York Times bestselling author. Just go to Amazon, type in his name, David D. Burns. David D. Burns. The website is feelinggood.com, feelinggood.com. Dr. Burns, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to promote?
I don't think so. It's just been great talking to you. I've appreciated it so much, and I think maybe just the one simple message is the message of hope. That when I was a psychiatric resident in the mid-1970s, and I had all this high-powered training and all this research on brain chemistry, we didn't have the tools to cause rapid changes in depression and anxiety, and it was kind of a not very hopeful situation for most patients. But now things have changed radically, and you can change the way you think and feel, and often quite rapidly. And I have a lot of flaws. The older I get, I find out how many flaws I have, and I just kind of decided to accept myself. But I have a few strengths, and one of my strengths is teaching complex things in simple language and showing people how to do things, and telling inspiring stories that will make it easy for people to understand how to use these tools. And so if you've been feeling down, maybe take a look at my first book, Feeling Good, or if you're having anxiety and panic and social anxiety, my book, When Panic Attacks, might be helpful. Or if you want to learn about the latest things, the new book, Feeling Great. Find one of these books and read it, and I think you'll discover that there's new things, the things that you can do that can make a tangible change in your life and how you feel about yourself and others. And I think the Dalai Lama said that happiness is probably the goal of life. The purpose of life is to feel happy. And maybe for some of you, my books will give you that gift, or give the book to a loved one and maybe give them the gift of happiness.
Dr. David D. Burns, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. We greatly appreciate your time. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. Leave us a review on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever podcasting platform you use. If you have any questions for Dr. Burns or for us, guest suggestions, anything at all, email us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next week, keep on working from home.